Alrighty, so like I said, we're going to discuss the role of oil in the Nigerian economy and discuss kind of the issues that have helped it, right? And then also what has become problematic, okay? And so what I want you to do as we're going over this is I want you to look at 5.2 and I want you to supplement your notes about, strengths and weaknesses of the Nigerian economy, basically. Sure. Okay. All right, so let's look at this first graph. I find this is kind of interesting here. Economic growth between 1960 and current situation. Current year is 2008. Really hasn't changed much. You can kind of see that it has followed the same general trend. But what you look here is the Nigerian economy has been pretty stagnant, right? And we're going to look at some of the reasons of why. You would think actually it has all of the ability to kind of skyrocket. So what is it about the Nigerian economy that has kept it relatively stuck in the mud? And this is GDP per capita. So one thing is if you look at the Nigerian population, that is another important thing to look at since 1960. So that'd be 60 years ago. So 60-year-old people. Look at from right here, right? Look how much the population has grown. And so when you look at GDP per capita, that means divided by the population, the growth of the economy would have to really keep up with the growth of the population in order for the GDP per capita to continue on the same trajectory. Now, in China, what do we know about the population growth since 1980, I guess? And that's basically starting right here. GDP per capita starts to shoot up because population growth actually starts to kind of tail off and curtail. So these two things are sort of relevant. Really what I want you to take away from this is that Nigeria's economic growth has been very stagnant, okay? And we're gonna discuss why that is right now. So first, it has a lot to do with oil. Now, oil was discovered in Nigeria in 1950, right before they declared independence from the British. And this independence, actually, this discovery of oil made everybody pretty optimistic about Nigeria's future, saying that, if it's sitting on this kind of gold mine, sort of, that eventually it is going to lead to economic growth like it did in other countries that their economies are really based on oil. Saudi Arabia, other countries, their economies really prospered because of the way that they handled this. But let's look here. There's also this kind of another contradiction of kind of principles. Is the economy benefits from oil because the government exports a ton of oil to the rest of the world. But the average Nigerian does not work in oil fields. They work in farming fields, right? And so why don't those two things mesh? Like, what have we seen already that these are like a contradiction of economic principles? What have we seen about how there's a clash of an agrarian society and this kind of oil-based economy? What is a word to explain why these two things do not fit? Put it in the chat, it's fine. Ooh, there is a social division that this has, and we're going to look at that basically at the end of this. There are definitely social divisions that are exacerbated by the presence of oil in Nigeria. Definitely. What else? That's a good one. Actually, not even. I like it when I ask a question and the answer comes out, which is correct, but it wasn't really the answer I was looking for. Kind of reminds me that there's lots of different ways to answer, especially in social studies classes questions. What else? What is another reason that agriculture and oil don't sync up. Rhymes with, oh, I was about to say that. Yeah, pollution, right? Doesn't rhyme with pollution. It is pollution. Remember we talked about, like, if you looked at this one here, this is a little cartoon that shows oil thieves are not getting protection from the government where other parts of the government are getting protection. So remember what we looked at is people that are, it's kind of this vicious circle, people that work in fields, right? Oil pipelines often run through their fields. Now, sometimes these pipelines break just because wear and tear. Sometimes they're actually chopped into by individuals that are trying to refine oil to sell gasoline themselves, kind of on the black market. But it's this kind of cycle that is really vicious, because what's happening is farmers' land is getting polluted by the oil that is getting spilled out of these illegal kind of refineries. And then now they don't have anything to fall back on. And so now they're the person who is going and hacking into the pipelines in order to make ends meet, right? And so this kind of what I'm talking about, this contradiction of economic principles is really difficult to have these two sectors, especially when the oil pipelines are not really guarded to the extent that they should be. It'd be really difficult. They have pipelines in the United States. It would be extremely difficult for somebody just to hack into one. They're guarded. They're very, like, it would be virtually impossible. But that's not the case in Nigeria. So we have this. Now, here's another thing. Somebody posted at the beginning of class, what led to the economic collapse, or what was it called? Yeah, basically the economic collapse in Nigeria in the 1980s. So here's the thing about oil. Nigeria is not the only country in the world that possesses oil, right? We've already talked about Iran, Mexico, right? These are two or three countries that really have economies that are centered around the exporting oil. So they're all members of OPEC. Actually, Mexico is not. I think, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. And the thing is about oil is when you hitch your economy to one, like, natural resource, but the price of that resource is not entirely under your control, then your economy can go up or down with the price of that. And so in the 1970s, the economy of Nigeria actually did pretty well because the price of oil kind of fell in their favor. And then in the 1980s, it completely collapsed because oil prices went up and they could not compete with it. They could not export enough of it and then get enough money back. So their economy, they were not built to have basically other structures in their government and their economy to survive that kind of hit. And so what they had to do is they had to go out and they had to go to these places called basically international lenders. The International Monetary Fund. Another example is I'm gonna put these in the chat, the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank. So yeah, I might have misspoke, Joy, about like the cause of it. I think the actual root of the oil prices dropping are less important as far as kind of what we need to know as to the dependence that the Nigerian economy has on oil, and that it is kind of largely out of their control as to what the price of oil is going to do to their economy. Okay, so at the end of the day, what we need to know is that what they had to do is they had to go out and they had to fix their economy, and they had to borrow money in order to fix their economy. So what they did is they went to the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. And remember, these are banks. They aren't just charities. And they had to apply for loans. Okay. Now, what happened? What do you need to do if you were to walk into a bank and ask for $1 million? What would they tell you? Maybe. What would they ask you? They might tell you, hit the road, but they'd probably ask you some questions first. They'd probably ask you for some personal information, but why? What do they want to know? They want to know if you can pay this loan back, right? It's a loan. Okay. If I walked in there and I showed them my paycheck and I was like, I need $5 million, they would say, well, I'm looking at your paycheck, and unless you are sitting on a gold mine, you can't pay us back $5 million loan. So we're not going to give you $5 million. Like, a bank is a business. So a similar situation happens in international loans. These international loans from the IMF and the World Bank, they have conditions attached to them. And the bank basically makes these countries sign contracts of that they will install things called austerity measures, and saying, you are going to cut spending on things like social service. We don't really care what you cut spending on, but you need to come up with a plan, and we need to approve that plan that you are going to be able to pay us that money back. Usually that means governments cut money funding to different social services and things like that. And so, like, if you are giving free healthcare to all of your citizens, that is extremely expensive. And the World Bank would say, you can't do that because you're not going to be able to pay us back our loan. And also, you can't take out a loan to pay for something that isn't going to make money. So what you do is you take out a loan to get your oil business back up and going, come up, maybe bring in more up-to-date technology that makes it more efficient and more profitable. You can't say, hey, I want to borrow $1 billion to give all my citizens healthcare, because there's no return on that investment. Okay. So there's kind of a double-edged sword with these loans. Now, here's what makes it, especially in Nigeria's case, more than double-edged problem, is you had these two guys, Babangida and Abacha, who were these two military dictators in the 1990s. And what they did is they applied for loans from the World Bank and the IMF. And they smuggled over $2 billion to their own personal bank accounts. So rather than investing in the country, investing in the infrastructure and seeing a return, this is really where the peak of kind of corruption in Nigeria takes place. Is the absolute, like, the leaders of the country are embezzling money that is intended to go to fixing the infrastructure, which will eventually help citizens, right? And so then you see, lots of protests that, like we saw with the oil pirates and other things like that, that are saying, hey, if the government has this much money, why don't I have running water, right? And so you have these kind of two versions there. Okay, so here's what we're going to do next. I think we have some good information about kind of the negative side of oil.